Okay, so I just had some great intro that I didn't record, but you'll never know because now I am recording. And what I have here is a composition setup where I have a Ring, Beyonce's Single Ladies, which was a very popular track a few years ago, and a dark purple solid. The solid is important to have for the first technique I'm going to show you, which is essentially going to generate a sound wave based on the MP3 that I've added. So any kind of MP3, AIFF, those kinds of files can be brought in. I recommend MP3 because it's nice and small and it's good for streaming. And I actually don't have that selected for this first technique. What I want selected is the solid, because the solid is what the audio waveform is going to be generated on. And the technique I'm going to choose is under Effect, Generate, and then you can see there's two audio options, audio spectrum, audio waveform. They are essentially the same thing where they're going to generate that heartbeat looking business. You have to make sure that you have the solid selected though, otherwise nothing in the effect menu will be available because you've got nothing selected, and that solid gets sacrificed to become the waveform. Okay, so any kind of effects, remember you can use solids not only for backgrounds, but any kind of filters you apply, you should have a solid for that. I will call him my sacrificial solid. So I'm going to go Effect, Generate, Audio Waveform. And at first it doesn't look all that exciting, but that's because I just made my screen go away. And the audio layer right now is set to the solid. That's not an audio layer. Okay, so the first thing you do after you apply this Generate Audio Waveform is under Audio Layer you have to choose the proper audio layer. Okay, so under audio layer, you choose the MP3 that you want to be represented in this waveform, and then if you scrub through, you'll see that it's actually moving to the music. Now, if I want to see the music or hear the music itself, remember that you do need to RAM preview in After Effects to hear sound. So if I just grab a little chunk of it there, you can see that it's doing the spectrum along with the music. Alright, so also notice that my solid is gone because it is now the waveform. Okay, so that's where the pixels that were used. As far as options that I can do, I can change the start and end point. So I don't have to have it be just left and right. I could either use these guys to drag it around, or you can see those little origin points here that I can drag. I also can change the path, samples, height, duration. I could change the thickness of the path. I could change the softness of the path. I can make it more random. I can change the color. I thought pink was appropriate for this, but let's go with like a purple color. I have a couple of options, but otherwise, if I RAM preview that, you could see it does it to the music, because it is the music. And of course, anything with a stopwatch can be animated. So you can actually animate that start and end point if you wanted to, and have it like kind of grow around or do whatever you wanted. So, you know, it's kind of limiting because it's a waveform, but I'm sure there's creative ways that you could use it. In another music video I showed you, somebody had the waveform following someone's footsteps, and then someone else made it very prominent where they duplicated it with gradient color and things like that. So there's things you can do with it. I'm going to remove that effect just by deleting it. So I have my solid back, and I also have my MP3 and my Ring. So spectrum and waveform work the same way, where you have to have an MP3 in your composition and a solid to do a technique on. The other one I want to show you, which I find a little bit more interesting, is actually an effect that's going to convert our keyframes of our audio into something that we can hook onto with our visuals. So it will actually take the MP3 and break it down into keyframes. So for each beat or change in the music, there'll be a keyframe there. And then we can control a object's property, whether it's transforming the size or the rotation or opacity with those musical keyframes. So in essence, it's a way of making something that's perfectly synced without you having to do more than what I'm about to show you. So it's a really fun and easy technique. To do this, you have to select your audio layer, and remember that one huge difference between After Effects and Photoshop is that After Effects is non-destructive. We don't need to worry about copying this audio file or anything like that. We can delete any effect that we do in the program, and it's actually going to generate a new layer with this technique that has nothing but keyframes on it. This is a thing that's underneath something called Keyframe Assistant, and the easiest way to get to that is actually just to right-click on the MP3 within the composition, and then go to Keyframe Assistant, where the only option will be Convert Audio to Keyframes. You can see that there's easing and other things that we'll get into later, but right now that's the only option since it's an audio layer that I have selected. So if you right-click on the audio layer in the composition and say Keyframe Convert Audio to Keyframes, you're going to get this new audio amplitude layer, and within that audio amplitude layer, if I twirl that down, you'll see that I've got a really solid block of keyframes. It's so solid, it's just black. I could zoom in on that using this little slider at the bottom, and even then, they're kind of just previewed. Remember, keyframes are always yellow diamonds in After Effects. So I'm going to tap U, so it will show us all the keyframes, and you can see it has a left channel, a right channel, and then both channels. And as of right now, this isn't going to do anything. It's just information. Okay. Now, in order to hook up a property of the ring to these channels, I'm going to have to use something called an expression. And we're going to go further into those in the next class. But an expression is the programming language in After Effects. The one that we're going to show you is probably one of the more common ones, where you're just controlling something with something else, kind of like parent-child relationships. But there's also things like wiggle that we're going to talk about in the next class to add like a more organic nature to animations, because it's just random code. It's not something that you have to go in and do it by hand. So when you do this audio amplitude command, you are going to want to twirl down that layer so that you can see the both channels slider. That's really important for this technique because that's the thing you're going to attach to. So you need to twirl down audio amplitude, and under effects there's both channels. Then I'm going to twirl down ring, and I could either twirl down transform or just tap the property that I want to affect. Let's say that I want the size to pulsate to the music. So I'm going to tap S for scale, and now this is where the expression comes in. If you option click on the stopwatch, it will open up the expressions palette, which just occurs in the timeline itself. So rather than clicking on the stopwatch saying I want to animate this, I'm going to option click on it, which opens up the expressions itself. So you can see it says transform scale. It's writing the code for me. When you see red text like this, which you probably have if you've used presets, that means that it's being controlled by something that's not in the timeline. It's being controlled by code in some capacity. So after I option click on that stopwatch, I'm going to grab the little pick whip, okay, the little curly cue, and I'm just going to drag him up to connect to the slider of both channels. That means that this layer is going to affect the scale of my ring. And so once I do that, I just have to click away, and you can see it writes the code, temp, this comp layer, audio amplitude, affect both channels. And now if I scrub, come here, buddy, you can see that it will change to music. Let me make this smaller. Okay, so let me RAM preview that.
Oh my god.
Okay, so you can see that that's pretty easy to do. There are some properties you might want to change. For example, this goes entirely away. And that's really typical. Like, it's taking it from like the very smallest scale and then using the beats themselves to choose the new scale. If you wanted to change that, it's a little tricky, but the way I've devised is you just need to kind of select those keyframes. You don't even need the left and right channel, but I'm just going to have both. And then the slider is now what controls the scale. So if I change the scale here, you can see it will retain a bigger size throughout. It will never get so small that it will go away. It'll just stay smaller. Okay, so you're pretty much changing its smallest property into something more manageable. So I want it to always be that size as like a base, and then it will get bigger from there, and then you can see what happens. And then I could add other properties to that as well. So if I wanted to add rotation to that, I would just do Shift-R to bring up rotation in addition to scale. I would option-click on the stopwatch. That's going to open up that. And then with the pick whip, I'm going to connect it to the slider. Click off or hit Enter. And now you can see I'll collapse everything by tapping M. And now you can see if I RAM preview that, the scale and rotation. kind of looks like it's injured